California is currently considering stringent restrictions on classic and muscle cars as part of its broader climate action plan. These proposed regulations could limit and even ban the use of such vehicles in certain areas, particularly in urban regions with high pollution levels. While the primary motivation behind these restrictions is the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, the move has sparked intense debate regarding the balance between environmental goals, cultural heritage, and economic impact. The state argues that classic and muscle cars with their powerful engines and high fuel consumption are significant contributors to air pollution. Unlike modern vehicles, which benefit from advancements in fuel efficiency and emissions control technology, older cars often lack the same level of regulation. Since California has set a goal to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045, phasing out or restricting high-emission vehicles aligns with its commitment to a cleaner transportation sector. Additionally, the state has already implemented aggressive policies promoting electric vehicles or EVs, including a planned ban of the sale of new gas-powered cars by 2035.
Lower the state's greenhouse gas emissions. It's part of the state's goal to reach zero emissions by 2045. There's been a lot.
The California Air Resources Board, or CARB, has been at the forefront of the state's efforts to combat air pollution and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. CARB is responsible for setting and enforcing air quality regulations, particularly those related to vehicle emissions, and plays a critical role in shaping California's aggressive climate policies. One of its latest initiatives involves a survey aimed specifically at classic car owners, particularly those with vehicles from the model year 1978 or earlier. This survey is designed to collect detailed information on how these cars are used, how they are stored, and how many miles they are driven annually. The goal is to gain a clearer picture of their actual environmental impact, given that older vehicles tend to be less fuel efficient and produce higher emissions, compared to modern cars with advanced emissions control technology. This initiative is part of CARB's broader strategy to transition California toward a cleaner transportation sector, in line with the state's ambitious climate goals, including carbon neutrality by 2045. Classic and muscle cars, known for their powerful engines and high fuel consumption, are often viewed as significant contributors to air pollution. By gathering precise data through this survey, CARB aims to assess whether stricter regulations or targeted restrictions on these vehicles are necessary. This effort also ties into CARB's Off-Road Outreach Team, or OOT, which focuses on monitoring and regulating emissions from off-road vehicles, including classic cars, that may not be used for daily transportation, but still contribute to overall emissions levels. The information gathered by CARB could lead to the implementation of stricter regulations, such as limitations on where classic cars can be driven, or even the introduction of fees for their use in specific zones. One such regulatory concept being explored is the establishment of zero-emission zones. These zones, similar to the ultra-low emission zones, or ULEZ in London, would restrict access to vehicles that do not meet a certain emission standard, effectively pushing classic cars out of certain urban areas. The enforcement of these restrictions could be done through automated license plate recognition systems, which would track vehicles entering restricted areas and impose fines on drivers who violate the regulations. Could California's bold environmental regulations trigger a nationwide trend, potentially transforming the classic car market and reshaping the legal landscape across the U.S.? California's approach to these potential restrictions could set a precedent for other states, as 17 states in the U.S. follow California's vehicle emission standards. As such, California's decision to implement such measures may prompt similar actions in these states, further impacting the future of classic car culture and restoration in the U.S. This move also reflects California's commitment to achieving carbon neutrality by 2045, which is in line with its broader environmental goals. States like New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Oregon, Washington, and others could follow California's lead by adopting similar restrictions, potentially affecting a large portion of the U.S. where classic car culture holds significant value. From a legal perspective, implementing these restrictions would require changes to existing laws or the creation of new legislation that facilitates the establishment of zero-emission zones. These zones would impose restrictions on non-compliant vehicles, including many classic cars, based on their emissions. The Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, the federal agency responsible for regulating environmental protection standards across the U.S., could play a pivotal role in either supporting or challenging these state-level measures, depending on how they align with national environmental policies. The EPA's primary mandate is to safeguard human health and the environment by setting and enforcing regulations on air and water quality, chemical safety, and emissions control. It oversees the implementation of the Clean Air Act, a crucial piece of legislation that establishes national air quality standards and regulates vehicle emissions. In the context of vehicle emissions regulations, the EPA typically sets nationwide standards, but California has historically been granted waivers under the Clean Air Act to implement stricter emissions rules due to its unique air quality challenges. These waivers allow California to enforce more stringent policies, and other states can choose to adopt them instead of the federal baseline. If California's proposed restrictions on classic and muscle cars are deemed excessively restrictive or inconsistent with broader national policies, the EPA could intervene by refusing to grant a waiver or challenging the regulations. Conversely, if the EPA views these measures as aligning with federal environmental goals, it could support California's approach and even encourage other states to follow suit. The potential for federal intervention in this matter adds another layer of complexity to the debate over classic car restrictions. If the EPA backs California's initiatives, it could set a precedent for tighter nationwide regulations on older, high-emission vehicles. On the other hand, if the agency determines that these restrictions unfairly target a niche group of vehicle owners with minimal overall environmental impact, it could push back against CARB's proposals. The EPA's stance on this issue will likely be influenced by the current federal administration's broader climate policies, as well as legal challenges that could arise from classic car advocacy groups, businesses, and other stakeholders who may argue that such regulations infringe on personal property rights or disproportionately impact small businesses in the automotive industry. Ultimately, the role of the EPA in this debate could shape not only California's policies, but also the broader regulatory landscape for classic and muscle cars across the country. Its decisions will have significant implications for environmental policy, federal-state relations, and the future of vintage automotive culture in an era of increasing emissions regulations. Now, one might wonder how this regulation could impact the classic car restoration industry. Well, the classic car market in the United States is not only a source of pride and cultural identity, but also a significant economic driver. The U.S. automotive restoration market was valued at over $900 million in 2023, with the North American classic car market projected to grow from $17.77 billion in 2023 to $37.24 billion by 2032. However, restrictions on classic cars could negatively impact restoration and parts manufacturing, leading to potential job losses. In terms of restoration practices, there's a strong emphasis on using period-correct parts and procedures to maintain the authenticity of classic cars, while sustainability is becoming a key trend with increasing interest in electric conversions and eco-friendly restoration practices. Technology such as 3D printing is changing the landscape by making it easier to reproduce rare components. The market is driven by enthusiasts who appreciate automotive history, car clubs, specialized repair shops, and events, with classic cars increasingly viewed as long-term investments. Rising disposable incomes further fuel interest in collecting and restoring vintage vehicles. Despite the challenges posed by regulations and environmental concerns, the growing interest in electric conversions for classic cars presents an opportunity for innovation in the industry. Furthermore, the cultural aspect cannot be understated. Classic and muscle cars are not just vehicles, they are pieces of history, symbols of an era and personal investments for many owners. The potential ban or restriction raises ethical questions about the preservation of cultural heritage versus the urgent need to address climate change. Discussions around these regulations often highlight the disparity in how different sources of pollution are treated. Critics argue that while classic cars might be targeted, other high-polluting activities or technologies like private jets or the production of electric vehicles, receive less scrutiny, suggesting a selective approach to environmental protection. Car enthusiasts and industries connected to the classic car market have strongly resisted the proposed regulations. Many view these potential restrictions as an overreach by the government into personal freedoms, particularly the right to enjoy hobbies and cultural passions. Advocacy groups such as the Specialty Equipment Market Association, or SEMA, have been vocal in pushing back, highlighting the significant economic contributions of the classic car industry, not just to California, but the broader U.S. economy. They stress the jobs, businesses, and tourism that rely on the restoration, collection, and preservation of classic cars, arguing that these regulations could have a far-reaching negative impact. The debate surrounding the potential ban or severe restrictions on muscle cars in 2025 has sparked a larger conversation about how society balances urgent environmental goals with the preservation of cultural heritage and economic interests. While environmental concerns are crucial, critics argue that the conversation often neglects the broader significance of these vehicles, which are not only symbols of a bygone era, but also investments for many individuals. The ongoing discourse invites a deeper public reflection on how the future of transportation should look and what place our past, particularly the legacy of iconic vehicles, should hold in a world striving for environmental sustainability. As these discussions unfold, it is clear that finding a solution that respects both the need for environmental progress and the preservation of cultural and economic values will require careful thought and compromise.